Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Motivational Millennial Podcast. Today we have a conversation with Dr. Brittney Cofield-Poole. She is a community psychologist and has a gorgeous vision for her online media platform that she's currently using to highlight inspiring stories from communities of color. So stay tuned for that, and please check out the after show at the end when Blake and I will share our biggest takeaways. Welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast, where we talk with inspiring members of the millennial generation who are living life with a sense of purpose and achieving their dreams. I'm Ivy LeClaire.
And I'm Blake Brandis.
Our Motivational Millennial guest today is Dr. Brittney Cofield-Poole. Dr. Cofield-Poole received her Ph.D. in Applied and Social Psychology from North Carolina State University. She is a budding community psychologist who believes the possibilities available to facilitate transformative change are both a humbling and challenging opportunity to uncover new methods of empowerment. She seeks to use her experience in scholarship, civic innovation, and creative coalition building as a platform to raise the volume for the voices of the underheard. Through her online media platform, Brilliant and Brown, her ultimate goal is to curate and craft poignant as well as positive representations of progress through digital storytelling. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Brittney.
Thank you for having me. And I must say, hearing my bio read out loud like that for the first time, I feel really good about myself right now. You did a great job.
Yay! That's wonderful. That is one of the amazing positive side effects, hopefully, of being on the Motivational Millennial Podcast.
I already feel motivated.
Yeah. So, Brittney, tell us more about what you're up to and why you're passionate about it.
Oh my gosh. Well, having finally finished graduate school, it's relieved a lot of space and time for me to really pursue things that I really care about. In community psychology, we are an empowerment focused and, as I said in my bio, transformative change centered sort of discipline in psychology. And what that means in sort of plain language is that our goal is to work with and for the community and find ways to empower them to be self-sufficient, empower them to feel as though they can really be accountable for and control their own environment in a positive and uplifting way. And so Brilliant and Brown became sort of this way for me to think about that through storytelling and through digital media, especially because we live in some pretty rough times right now. And I think it's a lot easier to find stories around detriment and devastation and not enough opportunities to really seek moments of joy. And so I think I'm using the time now to really think about how I'd like to use Brilliant and Brown as a platform for really giving people an opportunity when the rest of the media world has them down in the dumps, that they can feel inspired by someone else's circumstances.
That's really inspiring. Was there a defining moment for you that inspired you to launch Brilliant and Brown?
Yes, actually. I was on Facebook one day. Facebook news feeds, I believe, are sort of created through algorithms. Or at least that's what I've learned in some research around social media and how they try and kind of capture your attention. And what I noticed, for some odd reason, that most of my news feed was kind of filled with some pretty heavy stuff. Now, I am grateful for the fact that I have very socially conscious peers. So if nothing else, they kept me well informed about what was going on in the community. But it seemed to be sort of a lot more of the sad and the painful and the disheartening, and not enough around the great things that particularly communities of color are accomplishing. The media, and even in social media, I think people become obsessed with sort of sharing these deep and heavy stories, and there aren't enough opportunities for you to kind of to have a little sunshine in the midst of all of that. I feel like I had a newsfeed full of dark rain clouds. And so out of my own frustration, I said, if I want to see something that inspires me and that makes me happy, then why don't I just create it? Because I can't be the only person feeling this way. And often we talk about, I wish someone would do this. I wish someone would create that. And instead of just saying, why don't I just be the innovator that makes it happen. So I created the page that day, and then I kind of created a status around it and let my friends know, like, hey, I'm making this space for myself, but I'm also making this space for you, especially if you're seeking some positivity around your own culture and feeling like you want to be in a space where you feel good about who you are and who you represent.
How do you balance out from a community psychology perspective those conflicting, maybe, or at least certainly simultaneous emotions often that happen, and that there are these moments of pain and frustration and suffering, and then also simultaneously there are incredible triumphs and joys to celebrate? From a community psychology perspective, how do you balance those out? Or do you?
Oh my gosh, that's a really great question. I think that I was recently actually listening to one of my favorite podcasts, which I was talking to Ivy about earlier, called Invisibilia. And one of the most recent ones was around how technology is embedded within our daily lives, so much so that the way in which we use it impacts our personality sometimes. And so I found that fascinating because I thought they talked about a story where a gentleman was sort of exposing some bad behaviors on a train that he commuted on every day in New York. And then when he ran out of content, he decided that he wanted to then sort of start train shaming people. And he knew it was wrong, but he felt empowered by being able to kind of control the narratives of the people that he saw around him. They also kind of turned that story around and talked about how people have used technology for good as well. So I think we live in a world where balance is necessary. From a community psychology perspective, we definitely don't take for granted the notion that it can't be all hugs and smiles all the time. But when you develop platforms for communication, when you develop resources and tools for individuals, you also focus on teaching them how to persevere in the face of those challenges instead of being consumed by them, and use that as your fuel to problem solve even harder and think about how you might then create other conduits for achieving your goals, if that makes any sense. And so I think when you think about social media, it's sort of the same thing. We can use that tool to destroy or uplift. And I'm taking the opportunity to think about ways that I can turn the narrative around from depression and deprivation to individuals who might be using that opportunity for building something that really matters to them.
What was important to you about creating this platform that has positivity and sunshine, like you mentioned, for communities of color specifically?
What I would say is that I know that as an African American woman, and even as a scholar, what I've seen in research is that the articles that have the most publications are the ones around what a community, specifically one that comes from a community with limited capital. That's how I like to phrase that. It's a lot easier to talk about what they can't do, how they won't achieve at the same level as the majority and their counterparts, specifically individuals that aren't minorities. And so I think that with Brilliant and Brown, the idea was that I wanted to showcase all of the civic innovation that happens within Brown communities, and that we have a voice that can be framed in progression instead of detriment, right? And so I think that's really been the primary focus for me, and that I will go on different websites, right? It could be CNN, it could be Blavity, which is like a African-American sort of lifestyle digital media platform. It could be Afropunk. It could be ABC News, for all I know. It could really come from anywhere. I don't have any specific types of sources, but the whole point is that I want to hear how people are thriving, not just surviving. We can survive and still not be thriving. Those are not necessarily two things that go hand in hand often.
I really appreciate the focus on reframing the conversation around positive values that the community can generate, like you said, despite sometimes the lack of resources, but in some part because of the ingenuity that's required to survive and thrive with more limited resources. And I'm really reminded of a fantastic book called Hip Hop Genius by Sam Seidel, in which he talks about the values of hip hop culture as a culture of innovation, creativity, pulling power from lampposts in the South Bronx to create community gatherings, and the sampling aesthetic, and all of these different creative, resourceful, entrepreneurial innovations that have come out of hip-hop culture as a counterpoint to the mainstream representation of hip-hop, which often tends to judge it as hyper-commercialized, misogynistic, homophobic, and certainly there are elements of that in mainstream hip-hop, but I think any culture is much too complicated to paint with such a broad brush that it only consists of these values that are negative. And so I love the emphasis on reframing that conversation.
Absolutely. And I think, too, I really like that comparison, using hip-hop as a metaphor. Translational experience is something that I think people don't think a lot about. This idea that you can have a certain set of skills, you can be really good at something specific, but that doesn't mean that it can't transition into another arena. So someone who is a good lyricist and MC could also be someone who could be a fantastic adjunct professor teaching English at a prestigious university, because they understand literary elements, the importance of that in music, and how that translates into canonical literature like poetry and Robert Frost or something like that. Those are the kind of things that I want people to understand about communities of color, is that we may do things a bit differently than what the mainstream expects, but that doesn't mean it's of any less value.
That's right. I think increasingly in 2016, there are more and more representations of that immediately come to mind. You've got Bun B teaching at Rice University, somebody like J Live, who is a fantastic lyricist and also a teacher. And so the specific example you gave is very relevant, and I think that expands across all genres and areas of business and community representation as well.
Absolutely. There's actually, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ninth Wonder, but he is a music producer extraordinaire and very well known in the industry as well, especially in North Carolina, because he attended North Carolina Central University. But he had a documentary called The Hip Hop Fellow, and he was awarded a fantastic opportunity to be a fellow at Harvard University and teach a course on hip hop to students there. And it was just an amazing sort of visual journey that you got to go on with him, where he sort of talks about how he's translating his skills as a producer and using sampling techniques to create new music, and then also using that as a platform for looking at the history of music. And it just opened the eyes to a lot of students that you can use something like this to think about historical context and changes in society. And you can also think about how you enjoy listening to it on Spotify. It's got a double life. So,
well, listening to you both talk about all of these amazing people who are creating lives that they love and bringing those creations, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that you said a while ago when we were talking about your inspiration for creating Brilliant Brown, and you said that you wanted more of this out there, and instead of waiting for someone else to create it, you said, I am going to create this now. And I think that that's really cool and a really great motto to have for anyone.
Yeah, I think I've always kind of had that mentality. If I don't see something I like, then I'm going to figure out how I can create it myself or identify the individual who's the expert at doing so. A perfect example, for 2 years, I worked with a team of wonderful individuals, and we had an open mic called Mixed Mic Monday. And that was created out of this desire to have this community space where artists from all backgrounds, theater, comedy, singers, musicians, poets, lyricists, all those things could come together and sort of really have a safe space to be celebrated, and also have a space to really cultivate their own craft. And a lot of traditional open mics tend to be just more poetry and spoken word related. We were like, nope, we want to create a stage for artists from just diverse backgrounds. And we did it because it wasn't there. And it was extremely successful. And the real reason why we had to shut it down is because my dissertation happened. So I had to graduate, and my team members understood that. Yeah, so I mean, that's just another example. It's just, I feel like if it's not there, then why not? And if you fail, then fail forward. And if that doesn't work, then try something else, tweak it. And so I think Brilliant and Brown right now is a Facebook page, but I have much deeper aspirations for it beyond that. Created the page as a space for me to share these beautiful narratives in Brown communities, but I also have been thinking about how to expand that platform, not only share other people's content, but then create my own as well.
Could you talk a little bit more about your vision for that? Like what you want to see it become?
Yeah, so I would love to see it as a place where creatives and storytellers and innovators sort of seek to share what they're developing through my platform. I think I also can see as a space for me to do just what we're doing right now, have opportunities to have great conversations with interesting people and get what they're doing in the community out there for the world to hear. Right now, actually, I'm in the process of doing a bit of research with two colleagues of mine. We're hoping to get started on a documentary looking at some really, really deep history here in Durham, North Carolina around Parrish Street, which was related to Black Wall Street. So that's something we're looking into now. Also really interested in creating channels that speak to different demographics. I know that's a pretty lofty goal because you kind of have to define your audience and build from there, but I believe that ultimately, let's say 10 years from now, that this is a place that sages, grandparents could come in and leave wisdom for younger people. And this could be a place for college students looking to find their way through adulting to really express themselves, share with the world that though they're young, they too can be empowered to facilitate change. A place where creatives can have a platform for their work that maybe no one else pays attention to. A place where scholars can utilize it as a platform for more opportunities to share their voice using popular press and marry that with what they're doing in academia. I think the possibilities for what it can become are endless. So I think it's pretty open right now and pretty broad. And as I work through the different projects that I have in my mind, I'm sure it'll become more defined. But I ultimately see this as, I'd love for it to be just a nice, diverse media hub, maybe a public access version of the Brown NPR. That would be awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's so inspiring to hear you talk about your vision and your passion. Since you started pursuing this vision, what has been the biggest challenge that you've faced and how have you overcome it?
Oh my goodness. I think the curation process is very labor intensive. And so I was really good about scheduling, spending like a few hours on the weekend, really trying to pull content from different platforms and scheduling it to be sent out via the Facebook page, realizing that even in my own search for information about really awesome Brown citizens, that I had a narrow scope. And I had to challenge myself to think about, like, being a Black woman, I was coming primarily from the Black perspective. And then I had to think about, wow, there's so many other Brown cultures and communities that I need to be tapping into. And so I think the challenge is, like, really trying to find good places online that really are doing, I guess, similar work, that are developed specifically for specific Brown communities. There aren't really a lot. I mean, I know the ones for the African American community because I diligently, before I even became interested in Brilliant and Brown, just sought that because I felt like in mainstream media, I didn't have a solid representation of my voice. So I know where those outlets are, but when it comes to Asian communities, Latino communities, Native American communities, I'm struggling to find. I'm sure they're out there, but it's like, it's not easy to find. And then I sometimes think, is it a systemic thing? Is it that our media culture is so specific that it's intentional that it's hard to find these platforms about other people? And so that just makes me even more hungry to combat that.
So when you're faced with this struggle, what keeps you motivated? How do you keep going?
I think it's just the natural fire. Honestly, I'm one of those people who, if you tell me I can't, then I'm going to use my actions to prove you wrong. I don't have to say anything. I'll just show you. And so I think it's true. Like, I've always been that stubborn. So I think for me, it's like, the more that I go struggling to identify other platforms dedicated to sharing brown stories, the more determined I am to further build mine. And I hope there are other people doing this work. I would love to convene with some individuals that have the same mission, because I think you can never have too many people trying to accomplish this goal collectively. So I think just sheer force of will and frustration is going to continue to drive me forward, because this has been an issue that's lasted beyond my lifetime, right? This isn't something new. And so I just want to make sure that I'm a part of the solution.
Would you say that sheer force of will helped you get through the Ph.D. dissertation process as well? How was that experience for you?
Oh, man. I don't know if I'm quite recovered from that yet. I just graduated in May. I defended in December. Ph.D. programs are very much a marathon. It is a solo journey through very intense milestones that have you questioning your self-worth often. I think having a good support system is really helpful, and also building a community around you. I'm fortunate enough to be in the Triangle area, where you've got the lovely North Carolina State University, where I graduated from. You've got UNC Chapel Hill, you've got Duke University, you have all these other colleges and universities around, and this area actually has a pretty high concentration of Black and brown PhDs, which is amazing. And I didn't know that in moving here. And so I have had a wonderful support system where there are people who can empathize, and they talk to me off a ledge pretty much every week. So I think having a community was really helpful, and also just reminding myself of what my end goal was.
Are you recovered enough to be able to talk just briefly about your dissertation a little bit, like what you were studying?
Yeah, sure. Now that it's on the library shelf, I'm happy to. So actually, I worked for local government for about 3 years, and I worked in the IT department, and I worked in the community outreach division. One of the things that we were really interested in was sort of this promotion of digital literacy and digital inclusion, which is the idea that we live in a world where technology is quite pervasive in our everyday lives. However, there's still a significant amount of individuals nationally and definitely globally that don't have consistent and reliable access to technology. And that includes internet connection, that includes updated digital devices like cell phones, tablets, and computers. That includes community resources, so a lack of connection in community spaces, libraries, and school systems. And so I would consider myself a digital inclusion advocate. I think you cannot thrive without it. When we talked about thriving earlier, that's one of the resources necessary, especially in this digital age, for success. And so one thing that we were interested in looking at is trying to capture a baseline of what digital access looked like from a local municipality perspective. And so I did what they call a preliminary data collection project, where I developed a survey where I asked people questions about what type of devices they had, kind of access they had. If they didn't have it in the home, where were they finding it in the community? I asked them about sort of their technology efficacy. So this really an assessment of someone's confidence in their ability to use technology to do the things that they need to do on a day-to-day basis. I asked people, of course, for demographic information as well, and what kind of activities they did online. Now, because it was the first time that this local municipality had actually collected this kind of data, it came with its own subset of challenges, like getting a representative sample. That's always a challenge in research to begin with, but when you're doing something on a really large scale and it's literally just you and not an entire research team, like I didn't have access to people like doing random digit dialing where someone could call and do a survey. I was promoting as best I could through community portals. So I would go to citizen advisory council meetings, which is like these nonpartisan, citizen-led organizations within certain districts of the city, where they had a city council member sort of as a representative, where they would share their concerns or questions or ideas about how they wanted to improve their community. So I went to 15 of those meetings. I also did a little bit of local media promotion as well, radio, newspaper, went to community events and tried to promote the survey. So I did a lot. I had posters with QR codes on them. I mailed hard copy surveys because the assumption couldn't be that everyone could fill it out digitally, right? Because if I'm thinking about digital inclusion, I've got to think about individuals who may not have access to the internet or a computer. So I made sure I sent out hard copy surveys. They were in English and in Spanish as well. So I did my best to try and capture as many voices as possible. And I think it was so successful in that it had never been done before. And I also think it opened the door for particularly this municipality to think about the importance of data around community development and how important technology resources at the community level are for the success of those individuals living in those spaces.
Wow. I am fully impressed.
It's true. As you were talking about that, Brittney, I was definitely having flashbacks to
oh my gosh,
existential crisis, which is working on the dissertation marathon. Even with, like you said, having a great supervisor and still the self-doubt, the I'm getting to study exactly the thing I want, but yet can't seem to do it, even though I really care.
You sit there and you know that you're worthy and capable, but there's this little voice in the back of your mind that is questioning everything you've decided you want to do with your life. And combating that can be really challenging, but I do think that you wouldn't be on that path if you weren't supposed to be. And it's okay, too, if you've decided that you've gotten deep in it and it's not for you. I tell people that all the time. I've had young people who are interested in graduate programs ask me advice about doing a PhD program. And I said, if you look up one day and decide that this is not the right path for you, do not punish yourself for that. Don't shame yourself for that, and don't let anyone else make you feel bad about that decision, because I think you get one life. And if you don't want to spend your life defending everything you do academically, that's okay, because you've got a lot of other battles that you'll be working through no matter what field you choose to be in. And I think just be encouraged to know that you're not a failure if you change your mind. It's okay.
Yeah, that's such great advice, and it really is reminiscent of a piece of advice that Blake actually gave me, because I was talking about, I had this dream of myself getting a PhD forever, for so long, and it was, I think, in all honesty, about the achievement of getting a PhD. He was like, if that's not something that you really want and you're really passionate about, he was like, don't do it.
I tell people that all the time. I say, don't do this if you have any questions or doubts in your mind. And is there an alternative way for you to still achieve your dream without going this route? If you can find alternatives, research those. Put them up against each other and find out what it is you're willing to sacrifice on either option, because it is a bit of a sacrifice of your time, financially, social life, all those things. So he gave you good advice. It was good advice.
Totally.
So in addition to that great advice for people considering pursuing a PhD, is there other advice you would give to millennials who are on a journey towards fulfillment and success?
Wow, that is a super deep question, because I'm still trying to figure it out as a millennial. Oh my gosh, what advice would I give? I would say, do not be discouraged by not having it all figured out. You don't have to have a solid plan to get started. You don't have to have the best equipment. You don't have to have the best network or financial resources completely secured away. I think the best thing you can do is just get started, because it's easy to get stuck in the plan and never facilitate the action.
That's nice. I think the planning paralysis, or analysis paralysis, as it is often called,
oh my gosh,
is so omnipresent in every field, whether you're talking about business, academics, just even social life. I remember when I was in high school, my mother said, Blake, you should ask one random person who you'd like to get to know better to hang out once a month.
Yes.
Just ask someone who's interesting. Because they, okay, well, I don't know who and I don't know how. And she's like, it doesn't matter. Just ask them to go, like, grab ice cream or go to a movie or hang out. And it was great. It turned out some of my friends who I ended up staying in touch with long after high school were people who I had connected with at my mom's gentle nudging. Great
I think that's awesome.
Every part of life.
Yeah, I know it's cliche, but the worst thing someone can say to you is no. Like, rejection therapy is an amazing tactic. I think if you ask people for what you want and someone tells you no, you also have to remind yourself that, one, they may say no this time. That doesn't mean there isn't a yes waiting for you later. Secondly, if they continue to say no, then maybe they aren't the right person for you to be collaborating with, the right person to be in your network. Maybe if you get rejected from an opportunity, it wasn't made for you because there's another one waiting for you around the corner. So I think just because you don't get exactly what you want, it doesn't mean that it's the thing you're supposed to have. And keeping that in mind is really important too. And then putting yourself out there and
personalizing it.
Exactly. Like, it's not a critique of your ability. It's not a critique on your intelligence. It's more about how brave you are.
That's right, because it can be really easy to say, oh, they must not like me. Oh, I'm doing something wrong. I am bad at whatever I'm trying to do. And likely it is something that we don't know, that we can't control. And you can either drive yourself crazy, beating yourself up about whatever imagined critique you think is implicitly being leveled at you, or you can just say, okay, I'll try again later, or try again somewhere else.
Exactly. I remember applying for grad school. I got rejected, waitlisted by some universities. When I was leaving my last position, I applied to a huge technology company that completely rejected me, and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing my whole life? Like, this PhD means nothing. It means nothing. And then I got hired at my current job, and it's been one of the best experiences I've ever had professionally, because I'm in an environment where I can ask a question and I'm not dismissed. And they make it a part of their mission to teach and be transparent. And I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be.
This whole section reminds me of another episode of Invisibilia when they were talking about rejection therapy. I thought you might have heard it.
I did. That's what inspired me to bring it up, because I listened to that podcast recently.
Yeah, and I've heard of this in different personal development areas as well, that people will, instead of going out trying to seek yeses, they go out trying to seek nos. Like today I am going to pitch to 30 people and I am seeking 20 no's or something. You know, so they're working toward the no's because they know that eventually the right yes will, which I think is impressive, because that sounds intimidating to me, but I love that sort of twist on it.
Yeah, and it also gives you thick skin, too. If you can withstand the fact that not everybody's going to believe in what you're doing, but you have to be the one that pushes through. So I think it just solidifies for you, like, if you really care about what you're doing, then those no's won't defeat you.
So tell us about your morning routine. What do you do when you wake up that will make sure that you have an awesome day?
Oh, man. I'm probably the worst person to ask this question because I snooze my alarm to death every day.
Well, I was going to ask, do you have an evening routine, or is there something that you do daily or on an ideal day that kind of sets you up for success?
I'm going to be completely transparent on this one. That is something that I have to work on. I think that is a challenge for me. For such a long time, my life was work and school, and I didn't really have much left for anything else. And so now that I'm sort of free from that world, I'm still trying to discover what are the things that I can add to my routine that sort of keep me going throughout the day and the week. And I can't be the only one who feels this way, because I know there are other people who definitely struggle with finding their things. For a while, I mean, I played instruments. I think I'm one of those people who finds peace in doing more work. But it has to be in a creative capacity. I have to be creating something. And so it doesn't necessarily happen in the morning. It doesn't necessarily happen at night. It hits me sporadically. So I could be sitting there working diligently on an Excel spreadsheet, and then all of a sudden some kind of poetic thought will sort of move its way through my thoughts, and I pause and I have to get it out. And that, I think, this constant desire to be making something is what keeps me at peace.
Can you share a motivational quote or phrase or book that has changed your life in some way?
So yes, I can. And it's a Maya Angelou quote that I absolutely live by, and I think is a foundational piece to Brilliant and Brown as well, especially around sharing someone's narrative. And it's that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. That would be the one. So think about this notion of the underheard. If you are never allowed the opportunity to speak your mind, to tell your side, to be given the opportunity to be heard clearly and fairly, then that is agonizing, right? It's debilitating to be told to be quiet. And so I don't want anyone who ever encounters my work to feel like that they're still silenced, right? I want someone to feel like they can scream at the top of their lungs about who they are and what they're doing. And I want to be the megaphone that just pierces the sky with what they have to say.
And if you look at protest movements across the globe, this is the biggest philosophical tenet that they usually share. In post-colonial studies, it's often referred to as, this theorist Gayatri Spivak says, can the subaltern speak? And there are two questions there. Can they speak and can they be heard?
Right.
And so I think, for example, when I was in France, I was studying how young people, especially second and third generation immigrant youth, were using hip-hop as that public voice when they felt they had no public representation in politics, in business, in education. And so I love that quote too, and I think having an emphasis on not only listening to those voices, but affirming them and giving them a safe space to say, I know you've had to scream your entire life, but here is a place where we can have a conversation. Such a gift. And on a societal level and also on a personal level, I think.
Absolutely.
We've all had someone, and maybe it's on a plane or just at the mall or in Walmart, strike up a conversation with us, and we're not even really saying much, we're just kind of listening, but you realize in that moment, this person so badly needed to be heard.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about what's going on in the world right now, and I think about the iconic creation of Black Lives Matter, which is really an extension of what we saw during civil rights in the 60s and those kind of things, is that you often hear the critique that we don't know what they want, we don't know what their mission is, they're just in the streets yelling. Well, think about why someone would want to do that. Think about why people congregate and join their voices together to become louder, because there's always someone in the system quieting them down, hushing their concerns away, dismissing their lived experience. And there's nothing more frustrating than being told that's not really happening to you. It doesn't happen anymore. And that unless you've lived that life, you'll never know what someone else's pain is like. And so I think, yes, we live in a more progressive society, but injustices oftentimes now are a bit more covert and embedded within systems. But then now we're seeing sort of the opposite of that happening with the power of technology, right? So we talked about how there are multiple ways to use it. People are using it to expose injustices in a way that they could have never done before. Social media has opened the floodgates for that kind of storytelling, which is an amazing thing to be able to witness, in this time in our lives.
And you really see how systemic some of this inequality is, specifically because of that. Because now you have an entire incident on video. It's not a he said, she said. In some cases, it's just fragments of it. But often you see everything. And despite that, there is still such a struggle to even acknowledge that perhaps something needs to be investigated, or perhaps something needs to be looked into deeper. And I think that shows how much prior to the technology likely was going on and just never talked about or never exposed.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the most shocking. Hopefully, I mean, I hope we're not so desensitized at this point that we just see it and say, oh yeah, it's another killing, it's another whatever, because it is shocking and horrific and deeply painful, both to the individuals involved and to the communities of which they're a part.
Indeed. And I think you've got to think about, too, how mainstream media takes that information and they shape it. And so someone may share Facebook or Instagram photos of their personal life or uploaded videos about engaging with their friends, and they may say things that aren't necessarily the most socially acceptable, and yet you can take that and label them an ignorant thug when really they're college educated. They were just joking around. Their attire wasn't a suit and tie, but how is that relevant? I mean, I've seen it happen so many times, and I think what social media has done is given people their power back to control their own stories. And I think it's a beautiful and also terrifying thing, in that sometimes we see things that we can't unsee. There's some videos out there that I'm grateful for the exposure, but I just can't bring myself to watch because it's just unimaginable horror. But I don't want people to stop necessarily. I just think that we're going to bring the conversation back to the balance you talked about, right? So I think people should feel empowered to share those stories and really shed light on the terrible things that happen specifically in brown communities. But I also think that I'm happy to complement that with the amazing things that are happening as well. And that we're both providing a comprehensive view on what it means to be a brown person in the world these days.
Yeah, and I think what you're really getting to the heart of is imagining other people complexly. And
Right.
I think that's what Black Lives Matters is attempting to do. And frankly, that's what some of the pushback from pro-law enforcement communities is trying to do too, and say, look, law enforcement have a dangerous job. And I think everyone who is trying to be fair in this conversation saying, yes, like, absolutely, it is challenging for law enforcement. It is challenging for communities of color. But Black Lives Matter is saying, envision us complexly. Like you're saying, we can be more than one thing, and that's the respectability politics and all that about if you're not dressed a certain way, speaking a certain way, behaving a certain way at all times, therefore somehow you are less worthy as a human. And so there's all this history of it, and part of the blessing of the internet is now we have more exposure to these concepts, these nuances, these conversations and debates that have been going on for decades and centuries. But on the flip side, it's so easy, like you said, to just truncate it into literally black and white.
All the way back to the Civil Rights Movement, people didn't realize what was going on during the Jim Crow era until it was televised. So the weight of the experience that Black people in America were having didn't really have value. And I think, too, we've got to think about it from this perspective. Just because I'm pro something doesn't mean I'm anti something else. I can celebrate, be proud, promote, want to collectively empower the group that I belong to without necessarily saying that I would like to see the other side diminished. And I think that gets lost often, too. There's so many layers, and like you said, it's very complex. And I think the beautiful thing about being able to create your own media platform is that you also can choose how many facets of a story you want to tell. And I don't believe in dichotomies.
This conversation has been beautiful and open-handed and rich. I have really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of it and sharing all of your wisdom and insight.
Oh, thank you. I have loved it. I think all interviews should be like this. And to be completely, again, transparent, this is like only my second time being interviewed about Brilliant and Brown specifically. And if they all were like this, I'd do it every day. I would.
That's wonderful. Well, before we wrap up, will you share with the audience how they can find more about Brilliant and Brown?
Sure thing. So right now, the most active social media that I have going on currently is the Facebook page. And so that can be found at facebook.com/brilliant, the word and Brown. I can also be reached by email at brilliantandbrown@gmail.com as well. The rest of my social media is still in a bit of development, so I don't want to send people somewhere where they won't find much. So I'll just leave it at those two for now. Just so that people feel like they're getting a good experience.
Wonderful.
That's perfect. Well, Brittney, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome. I can't wait to hear how this came out and also to share some of the awesome other conversations that you have with some other motivational millennials.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is supported by Motivational Millennial Workshops. Whether your desire is to connect with other millennials or to provide personal or professional development opportunities to your community, our workshops are customized for your needs. Visit www.motivationalmillennial.com/workshops to learn more.
Hello and welcome to the after show of our conversation with Dr. Brittney Cofield-Poole. Really wide-ranging and intriguing conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great.
So, Ivy, what was your big personal development takeaway from the conversation?
Well, for me, it was the moment where she said that her ability to overcome struggle comes from her natural fire, and that when people tell her that she can't do something, she proves them wrong through her actions. Mm-hmm. And that really resonates with me because I feel like I feel that way as well. I definitely feel that way as well. There's something really intriguing to me about showing people what's possible, and it's especially intriguing when it's different than what they think is actually possible. I like showing that it's not about showing and proving what I can do. It's more about proving that this is possible for anyone to do. I think about, I called it my epic journey. It was after I graduated from undergrad. I was not ready to pursue a career yet, honestly. I didn't feel ready. But I felt like I really wanted to just get in my car and drive. And just like go and go and go. And for so many people in my world, that was totally bizarre. Like, totally, what are you talking about? Because I was taking my tiny 4-cylinder 2-door coupe and my dog. I had to take the passenger seat out of my car to have enough room for the food and the space for my dog and all of this stuff, to like literally live in my car for 6 weeks and travel over the US. But people telling me, well, are you sure? Or that's crazy, or they're being skeptics, made me feel more encouraged, actually. Because why not? Why? Like, I can see a path for it. I can see that it has a place in my life. And it was absolutely transformative. And so if me doing that can inspire other people to make those kinds of decisions that they have a vision for, they have a path for, or even if their decision is literally like, oh my gosh, that sounds really awesome, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to pack up my car and go, because someone showed that it was possible, that's to me what's exciting, because it's like breaking out of the paradigms and the limiting beliefs that people have. I really love shattering those. I think it's really awesome.
So how do you feel like that trip transformed you personally?
First and foremost, it helps me learn to trust myself. Because no one was telling me where to go, what to do, or how to do it. Honestly. I bought a huge atlas and mapped this route out and got everything that I needed in my vehicle, and I just went. And it was trusting myself for that bigger journey, but it was also trusting myself in all of these little micro moments. because I had to make a decision between, am I going to pull over and sleep here tonight, or am I going to keep going and push myself, or where do I want to go eat? Do I want to eat at this restaurant or the next? And I found that by learning to trust myself, I honed the ability to listen to my inner compass and my inner voice, which I consider my connection to universal wisdom. And I discovered that any time that I listened to that voice, things turned out awesomely. Whether it was I got the best amazing sandwich ever, or I met someone really cool, or I had a really great story to tell, the whole journey gave me opportunity to trust myself and my inner compass.
I think that trip just demonstrates so much courage too, because just deciding I'm going on this path, there's a general idea of where you're going, but you don't know. You said where you're going to sleep every night, is pull over in this rest stop and sleep in your car. And like that just takes so much courage. And I think it's a really good analogy for so many journeys that we go on in our lives, where we might have a sense of where we want to go, but all the individual stops along the way are not necessarily clear.
Yeah, it's so true. Absolutely. And when you get to a place, you might get new information that you go, okay, this is not the best place for me to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had an instance, I had this place mapped out in my mind. It was by the beach in NorCal. I can't remember the name of the town now, but it was close to Oregon. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go there, and at the end of the day, I'm going to drive and find a parking lot that's like kind of by the beach, and then I'm going to enjoy this amazing sunset. And I found a parking lot, but it was near this like weird swampy thing. I don't know, but I was like, it's okay. Here's the sunset. It's beautiful. Then the parking lot turned into this weird meeting place for people at night. I was like, okay, I'm quite uncomfortable. So I left, went to a Walmart parking lot. If you need a tip, most of the time Walmart parking lots are safe to be at. This was not one of those, though, because in the middle of the night, I got woken up, me and Lacey, my tiny dog, got woken up by a cop, like, tapping, you need to go park on the street. He had to go wake up my neighbor, who was somebody in a trailer driving. They thought it was safe, too, but it wasn't. But yeah, it was like in that moment, I had to just reevaluate, readjust, keep going, and then wake up the next morning and be like, okay, that was interesting. So it's like, this pit stop did not work out the way that I thought it was going to, but it's cool, man. And like, today is a new day, and I'm just gonna like keep going. So it's awesome. Well, thank you so much for letting me share that. I've forgotten about that. But what did you find the most interesting thing for you?
I love when Brittney said something to the effect of be the change you want to see in the world. Like if she doesn't see the thing that she wants to exist, she creates it, like she did with Brilliant and Brown.
Yeah.
For me, that was the journey that I went through with my music. I recognized there was plenty of great underground hip-hop out there, plenty of fantastic producers and amazing beats, but there wasn't quite that combination of really in-depth wordplay and very accessible production, like the instrumental bed of the song. And so I thought, I want to create that. And of course I started out doing it with limited technical expertise in any realm of that, whether it was my lyricism, my beats, my ability to record. When I was first recording, I didn't realize you could plug your musical keyboard into the computer, so I just had one microphone hanging over the old Yamaha keyboard speakers, and we would play as many instruments, my friends and I would play as many instruments at the same time as we could, and you could loop it back using Sound Recorder on the old Windows 95, and you could only do that a couple times before the sound quality was terrible. So eventually I learned how to actually produce music, but it was that impulse that just said, I want more of this in the world. And it didn't have to be perfect, and it was far from perfect. And even now, my music is improved, I could say objectively, on a number of levels, but there's still room to grow. And last album I put out, Scholar, it was really an attempt to have a community and world building album that was full of wordplay and really fun, accessible beats, and it was part of my dissertation, so that was a nice tie-in to what Brittney was saying, too, about the struggle and the journey of academics, even if you're doing what you love. And in my case, I think it was really an incredible opportunity that I'm really grateful for, to be able to create art as part of my scholarly research and say, I've seen this kind of community building in Christian rap, for example, where they have a very clear worldview that they're sharing and encouraging people to be a part of. But on the underground hip-hop side, it was more, we are anti-mainstream, we are not thugs, we are not gun rappers, but there wasn't a whole lot of who are you. It was definition by negation, and I wanted to create a positive identity. And so that's always a work in progress, but I really like that she said of creating that which you want to see in the world.
Yeah, well, it's great because that desire to create what you wanted to see more of is what got you to start in the first place. Yeah, maybe, like you said, it wasn't the greatest, but if you hadn't started at all, we wouldn't have continued long enough to be in a position to where you could create this art and then also create something else you wanted to see in the world, which is really cool.
That's right. One of the lines in the new tracks, I've got an album coming out that was Kickstarter funded. Shout out to my Kickstarter supporters. It's coming. I know it's been a little longer than initially anticipated, so thank you for your patience. But I've got a line that says, "Gotta be bad before you get better." And I really believe that's true for everything. If you just accept from the beginning that the start is not going to be perfect, and that's great, then you don't have to worry about mistakes, failure. You just say, hey, part of the process. So,
well, I can say, probably speaking for both of us, that we are really grateful for all of you who have been here with us from the beginning as we continue on this journey. Thank you so much for listening to the episode today, and we'll be back next week.
For show notes and upcoming guests, or to learn more about Coactive Coaching, the blog, and our other awesome offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Christy Hostler and Team Podcast.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Blake Brandis.
Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!